They didn't even have the nerve to look me in the eye. HR handled it, like always. A tight-lipped meeting, a vague memo, and a politely worded demotion that wasn't called a demotion. Restructuring, they said, lateral transition, but the bonus pool was smaller, and the title meant nothing. Just last week, I'd wrapped up shadow training for Ethan, the boss's son. Fresh out of grad school, full of empty confidence, and utterly convinced he was reinventing the wheel, I walked him through everything anyway, the systems, the reports, the vendor reviews. I assumed I was building the next layer of the team. Apparently, I was training my replacement. That's the part they never admit, when betrayal is handed to you in a folder and dressed in business language. But I didn't argue, because I'd seen the numbers. And those numbers didn't add up, not for him. And not for Ridley. My name's Martin. I'm 42, or at least, I was when all this began. For over a decade, I worked as a senior financial analyst at a mid-sized logistics firm just outside Chicago. Not the kind of place that makes headlines, but solid, quietly profitable. The kind of company where people stay for years if they're smart, and decades if they're lucky. I started in accounts payable, entry level, back when we still filed paper invoices in metal cabinets. No special connections, no leg up, just patience and consistency. Over time, I moved through budget planning, then onto compliance and internal audit. But by bit, I carved out a space where I could be relied on, the guy who caught errors before they became problems. I never missed deadlines, never made a show of anything. But the work was always done, and always right. I wasn't flashy. I didn't push for promotions or elbow my way into boardrooms. What I valued was clean data, balance sheets, and enough clarity to sleep at night. I didn't care about titles. I cared about integrity. And for a while, that was enough. Outside the office, life was quiet. My wife, Karen, taught English at a public school nearby. Our daughter, Lily, had just started high school, all braces, late-night study sessions, and a growing independence that made me both proud and uneasy. We weren't wealthy, but we were steady. No debt, a modest mortgage, and a small savings cushion we rarely touched. I wasn't chasing influence. I just wanted to be useful, respected, maybe, but never feared. So, when I felt that respect slip, not because of failure, but because someone younger had a last name that mattered more than my track record, something shifted. Not in anger, in resolve. Ethan arrived on a Monday, like a package no one ordered but everyone had to acknowledge. Navy blazer, sharp haircut, cologne you could smell to rooms over. Introduced himself like a politician, strong handshake, memorized charm, the kind of confidence you only get when you've never had to earn anything. He was Ridley's son, and he made sure we all knew it before anyone else had the chance. At first, it felt harmless. We'd had interns before. Some had even stuck around and grown into solid contributors. I'd mentored a few myself, and I didn't mind doing it again. There's a certain rhythm to training someone new, the patient walkthroughs, the slow shaping of habits, the satisfaction of seeing someone learn. I thought this would be the same. But Ethan didn't want to learn. Not really. He wanted to be seen as someone who already knew. He'd interrupt mid-sentence during meetings, questioning decisions without context. If someone mentioned a metric he didn't understand, he'd shrug it off or pivot to something flashier, usually something vague about streamlining or real-time analytics. One time, during a budget reconciliation review, he suggested scrapping the entire process because finance should be more agile. I didn't say anything then. I just turned the page and kept going. It wasn't worth the breath. Ridley, though, he loved it, called him a natural, told the team Ethan had fresh eyes and next-gen instincts, and every time he said it, I nodded along. I didn't need to be applauded. My value was in results, and I figured the dust would Settle once Ethan hit his first real problem and realized how little theory prepared you for corporate reality. I taught him anyway, not because he deserved it, but because the work deserved it. The systems, the audit protocols, the cash flow checks, they couldn't afford to be mishandled. So I walked him through each one carefully, explained what mattered, what didn't, and what could quietly destroy a department's credibility if left unchecked. He smiled, nodded, pretended to absorb it all, but half the time, I'd see him scrolling through his phone while I explained invoice matching. Still, I stayed professional. Loyalty, to me, wasn't conditional. I'd given this company 12 years. I believed that still counted for something. That belief cracked the day I opened the new org chart. It came via email, disguised as a routine update. Nothing dramatic, just a new PDF, quietly announcing departmental changes. I scanned the structure quickly, more out of habit than concern, until my eyes landed on Ethan's name, not just in the team, above it. Above me. No warning, no meeting, no handshake. Just a new title, listed beside his name, Director of Financial Strategy, a title that didn't exist last month. Reporting directly to Ridley, and me, shifted into Senior Consultant, Operations Alignment, a step sideways, if you were being generous. A step out of the picture, if you were being honest. There was no thank you. No call to explain, just silence. That silence told me everything. My loyalty wasn't being tested, it had already been dismissed, and in that moment, I wasn't angry. I was something colder, something sharper, something that paid attention to patterns, like new titles that didn't follow process, and reports that no longer came through my desk, something that knew how to look past the surface. The numbers had always told me the truth, and now, I was finally ready to listen. No one asked how I felt. Not Ridley, not HR, not even the colleagues I'd helped get promoted over the years. Most of them, I just avoided eye contact, like I'd already been filed away in the past relevance category. I didn't fight it, didn't request a meeting, didn't fire off a reactionary email. That's what they expected, some emotional response they could frame as unprofessional. Instead, I nodded through the transition paperwork, shook a few hands, and moved quietly into my new cubicle by the copier. Let them think I was wounded. Let them believe I was too stunned to resist. Truth was, I'd already seen enough to know something was wrong, not with the hierarchy. That was just ego games. What bothered me were the inconsistencies I'd flagged months ago. Vendor payments that didn't line up, contractual renewals signed too early, expense reports that felt padded. Back then, Ridley had brushed them off with a smile and phrases like executive discretion or pilot programs. But now, with Ethan skipping the ladder entirely and the chain of review rerouted through him, it made sense. Not emotionally, structurally. The timing had changed too. Certain invoices now cleared faster, even ones with errors. Approvals came through late at night. Systems that once required dual authentication had been restructured under efficiency protocols, and buried in all of it were anomalies just subtle enough to go unnoticed if you weren't looking. But I'd been looking. I just hadn't acted. Not yet. Letting them think I was finished gave me something I hadn't had in years. Space. They weren't watching me anymore, which meant I could start watching everything. Unfiltered, uninterrupted. They assumed they'd taken something from me. In reality, they'd handed me exactly what I needed: time, distance, and a reason to dig deeper. I didn't go in with a theory, just a feeling, a tension in the data that didn't sit right. I knew how this company ran. Every dollar had a home, every vendor a trail. So I started where I was most familiar, the queue to vendor reports. I'd combed through them before, dozens of times, back when those reports still came across my desk regularly. But now, without pressure or deadlines, I could really look. Line by line, one name kept resurfacing: RLR Solutions. They were listed as a regional freight partner, Invoices were regular, like clockwork. $18,700, billed monthly, never late, never questioned, but something about the uniformity felt off. Freight costs fluctuate, volume changes. Nothing in logistics is that clean. I cross-referenced them against internal dispatch records. No match, not a single truck movement logged, no delivery times, no fuel expenses, no dock confirmations, just billing. Tidy and consistent. That's when I ran their listed address through public records. Not a warehouse, not a facility, a P.O. box in Delaware. The kind registered agents use when they're trying to look official from a distance. No phone number, no operational license, and no digital footprint beyond an outdated landing page built from a free template. It wasn't just suspicious, it was empty. Next came payroll. I had enough access left to pull departmental structures, even though most of the strategic level reporting had been rerouted through Ethan. Within the temporary services line item, I found 3 names flagged as contractors: Malik Turner, Cassie Long, and Thomas Brandt, all marked as consultants, but none with any email addresses, project logs, or departmental assignments. Each had been paid lump sums, not weekly or monthly, quarterly, quietly, through a separate HR channel Ridley had taken control of during the last efficiency review. And then there were the budget reallocations. Internal memos showed subtle shifts, small percentages rerouted from departmental reserves to a strategic innovation initiative under Ridley's signature. It didn't raise alarms because the wording was benign, but the frequency increased over time. 5 transfers in 12 months, all conveniently timed just before quarterly audits. At that point, I brought in Priya. We'd worked together for years in compliance. She was sharp, meticulous, and far more patient than me. She didn't have full clearance, not after the reorg, but I still trusted her judgment. I shared what I had and watched her expression shift from curiosity to quiet confirmation. "I've been seeing odd approvals too," she said, "especially on vendor onboarding. Fast-tracked applications, missing sign-offs. But without payment access, I couldn't chase it further. So, we combined what we had. I reconstructed the timeline, a full 18-month window, noting every vendor payment, payroll outlier, and internal memo. She pulled transaction metadata from the expense side and added context for approvals, timestamps, and source IPS where possible. Then came the kicker. Our LR's payments weren't just regular, they were routed through a holding company. That entity had a matching routing number linked to a family trust in Ridley's wife's name, not a company trust, personal, shielded behind layers of LLCs and registration games, but traceable if you knew what to look for. At this point, it wasn't just questionable ethics. It was fraud. Structured, planned, quiet. The scale was sobering. Over $400,000 funneled out under the radar, disguised as operational necessity, with signatures to match and just enough variance to avoid detection by automated systems. It wasn't a slip, it was a system, built by someone who knew where the controls were, and how to shut the lights off behind them. Ethan, for all his bravado, was just a distraction, flash, noise, while Ridley moved the pieces in the background. My demotion, that wasn't personal, it was tactical. One less set of eyes in the wrong place. But now I had every piece, every name, date, transfer, and signature. They built a firewall around themselves, convinced the rest of us were too loyal, or too indifferent to notice. They were wrong, and the numbers were finally loud enough to speak for themselves, confronting. Ridley would have been the obvious move, the emotional one. But that's not how you handle people like him. Men like that don't fold under pressure. They dig in, spin the narrative, weaponize authority, and in his position, with his title, he'd make it look like paranoia. Or worse, revenge. So I stayed quiet, let the audit trail grow, compiled everything into a folder one I kept offline, encrypted, and backed up twice. Vendor ledgers, payment memos, email threads, Even security badge logs showing no physical visits from the supposed consultants, everything linked and time-stamped. I was building a case, not a complaint. Priya helped streamline the documentation. She was clinical, focused. She didn't ask how I felt about any of it, and I appreciated that. It wasn't about feelings anymore. It was about clarity. She reviewed policy frameworks, cross-checked approval protocols, even highlighted areas where Ridley had rewritten procedure just enough to shield himself. One document, in particular, stood out, an internal memo giving the director of financial strategy provisional clearance to bypass to stage approvals. Ethan's title, Ethan's clearance, but Ridley's voice behind the pen. It was layered. Designed to be just legal enough, just procedural enough, to discourage questions. But we had enough now. Enough to justify internal investigation and enough to time it strategically. That's when we pulled the payroll schedules. Payday was for days out. Bonuses, too. The final cue for performance adjustments were being uploaded to the system. If Ridley followed his pattern, the final siphon would come the night before, masked as a final payout or consultant retainer. It had happened twice before, like clockwork. So we waited. Not passively, tactically, Priya drafted a formal internal complaint package addressed not to Ridley or HR, but to internal legal and the audit committee. It was delivered anonymously through the company's protected whistleblower channel, time-stamped with full supporting documentation, no names, just numbers, enough to trigger a mandatory compliance review under the firm's own policies. We didn't speak much after that. Didn't need to. They thought I was sidelined, that I'd folded, that I was another quiet casualty of corporate politics, licking my wounds in a smaller office. Let them believe that. Let them keep underestimating the man who once approved their balance sheets. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was making sure the right system finally ran. It started just after 9. 3 people walked in together. Not from our floor, not familiar faces. Blazers, clipboards, and the kind of quiet presence that makes seasoned managers suddenly remember policies they haven't reviewed in years. No introduction, no heads up, just audit. I watched from my desk, which sat awkwardly wedged beside the copier and a half-dead ficus. No one spoke to me. They didn't need to. I already knew what they were here for. At 9:07, Ridley was still chatting in the hallway with the vendor rep, laughing too loudly, trying too hard. By 9:30, the laughter stopped. His office door was closed, blinds drawn, with 2 auditors seated across from him. The third began requesting system access and backup documentation from IT. By 10 o'clock, Ethan was called in. He walked in with his usual swagger, straightened cuffs, checking his reflection in the glass. He came out 20 minutes later, silent, slightly hunched, eyes darting for someone to explain what just happened. But no one did. There was no panic, not yet. Just a shift in the air. People became quieter. Some closed tabs. Some left their desks under the excuse of coffee refills they didn't need. A few glanced toward my cubicle and then quickly looked away. By 11:15, legal was in a conference room down the hall. I caught a glimpse of one of the partners, external counsel, flown in for escalated review, the kind of visit that usually follows a whistleblower report, not a routine audit. At 12:03, HR issued a company-wide email. Subject, internal, operations realignment, departmental briefing to follow. No details. Just a calendar block for the following Monday. Ridley didn't leave his office all day. No one dared knock. Ethan disappeared entirely after lunch. His desk remained untouched, computer on, charger still plugged in, water bottle sweating. Beside his keyboard. I didn't gloat. I processed invoices, logged to vendor terminations, finalized a reconciliation for a team that now remembered my name again. There's a strange peace in watching consequences unfold exactly as planned. It's not satisfying in a cinematic way. No dramatic showdowns or loud accusations. Just quiet corrections. Systemic recalibrations. At 3:02. My name appeared on my screen. A meeting invite. From Executive HR subject, role reinstatement. Immediate action. Rake already walked in without a notepad. Just myself. 3 people were already seated. The same HR manager who had delivered my demotion, one of the legal reps from the morning session, and the VP of operations. Ridley wasn't present. Ethan's name wasn't mentioned. We're reinstating your previous title, the HR manager said, carefully, effective immediately, no apology. Just logistics. Your salary and benefits will be restored retroactively to the date of reassignment. You'll be reporting directly to finance again. Your system access is being updated as we speak. I nodded. Not because I was grateful, but because I understood. They knew, not everything. They wouldn't say that. But enough to know they'd let something slip too far, too long. Enough to realize that silence doesn't always mean surrender. They didn't ask how I found what I found, or why I didn't say anything sooner. They didn't thank me, either. They just reactivated my clearance and asked if I had any questions. I said no. Then I went back to my desk. Same chair, same computer, same login. But something was different, not in how others treated me. That would take time, if it ever came. The difference was internal. I had exposed a rot that had been hiding in plain sight, protected by hierarchy and arrogance. And I did it without raising my voice, without demanding recognition, and without breaking a single rule. That's the part people don't understand. Sometimes, power doesn't shout. It watches, waits, and when the moment's right, it moves, just once, precisely, and permanently. Ridley's resignation came 2 weeks later. No town hall, no speech, just a morning memo from corporate affairs, thanking him for his years of service and wishing him well in his next chapter. The kind of corporate send-off reserved for people you're trying to erase quietly. Ethan disappeared even faster. One day his name was still in the directory. The next it was gone. No farewell message, no file handover, not even a bounced email to mark the absence, just silence, which, fittingly, was how he entered and exited the system. All surface, no substance. I didn't get a promotion. Didn't expect one. There was no handshake from the CEO. No frame certificate or mention in the quarterly update. What I got was reinstatement. My name, my record, untouched, my access, fully restored, and the weight of knowing I'd stopped something that could have hollowed out the company from the inside. The first few weeks were odd. Some people offered cautious smiles. Others avoided me altogether. No one asked directly, but I caught the glances in meetings, in hallways, a few whispered questions. Did you know? Was it you? Is that why he left? I never answered. Not directly. Sometimes the numbers speak for themselves, I'd say. That was enough. The truth is, it's tempting to go loud when you've been wronged. To announce every discovery, every betrayal, every win. But the older I get, the more I realize, timing matters more than volume, and silence, when used properly, carries a kind of authority no speech can match. 6 months later, the department feels different. A little more cautious, a little more transparent. No more last-minute vendor approvals. No more off-record consulting, hires. The bonus pool stabilized. The quarterly reports aligned cleanly. It's not just about one man stepping down. It's about resetting the culture. Quietly, but decisively. I still sit at the same desk. Still drink the same coffee. Still walk the same hallway every morning. But I walk it differently now, not because of recognition, but because I know exactly what I prevented. I never wanted power. Still don't, but what I do value is clarity, integrity, and the knowledge that if you pay attention, really pay attention, most lies unravel themselves. To anyone who's ever been pushed aside, overlooked, or quietly replaced, I'll say this: keep the receipts, not just emotionally, Literally. Because when the moment comes, and it will, you'll be ready. And when justice arrives, it rarely makes noise, but it always leaves a mark. If you've ever had to prove your worth in silence, I'd like to hear how you did it. Share your story in the comments, because sometimes the quietest victories are the ones worth remembering.